There are moments in live television when the script disintegrates, when the carefully staged choreography collapses, and what's left is raw conflict laid bare before millions. That's exactly what happened the morning Karoline Leavitt sat across from George Stephanopoulos. It wasn't just another segment on Good Morning America. It was the kind of clash that exposes more than just politics. It exposes the soul of a country and the hypocrisy of the media institutions that claim to speak for it. The studio, as always, buzzed like a hive before the cameras went live. Assistants dabbed at foreheads, floor managers barked last-second orders, and the control booth rehearsed transitions with military precision. But none of them could anticipate that this tidy stage was about to transform into an arena. Sitting at the center was Karoline, her composure icy, almost unnerving. She wasn't jittery, she wasn't playing the eager guest. She looked like someone walking into a fight she had already decided to win. Across from her sat Stephanopoulos, shuffling note cards with that trademark smirk he's cultivated over decades, the grin that says, "I'm in control here. Before we dive in, subscribe, please." His plan was simple. Lead her into the segment, frame her as predictable, poke enough holes to get a viral clip without breaking a sweat. But George miscalculated. He thought he was about to spar with another politician desperate for airtime. Instead, he was about to face a woman who had no intention of being polite for the sake of television. The first words were routine, but the energy was already uneasy. "Welcome, Karoline. Glad to have you here this morning," George began, the kind of polished opener he could deliver half asleep. Karoline's reply was firm, even sharp around the edges. "Happy to be here, George." The tone wasn't sugar-coated, it was measured, deliberate, almost like a warning shot. Then George dropped his opening jab. "Your new book brands itself as a manifesto for the forgotten American, but some critics say it's just old conservative slogans repackaged for a new generation. Isn't this more the same?" That one line lit the fuse. Karoline leaned forward slightly, the kind of movement that tells you she's not dodging the punch, she's about to throw one back. "Critics who say that," she fired back, "haven't read the book. They read headlines, they parrot talking points, and then they sneer at anyone who doesn't fit the establishment mold. The ideas I put forward aren't recycled slogans. They're survival plans for people who don't get cocktail party invitations in DC or Manhattan." The control room suddenly went quiet. Producers glanced at each other. This wasn't going to be the easy ride they expected. But George pressed on. "Karoline, let's be honest. Isn't your brand just part of a larger pattern? A young conservative clinging to America First rhetoric, waving the same flag with a different face?" His tone wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as one. Karoline didn't flinch. Her lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "You say pattern like it's an insult. Maybe the real problem isn't that I'm consistent. Maybe the problem is that Washington and networks like yours abandoned the very people you pretend to care about. I grew up around those people. I didn't inherit influence. I fought for my voice. That's not a pattern. That's reality." The studio air turned heavy, almost suffocating. Even the interns in the back stopped moving. They knew they were watching something different, something dangerous. Sensing the tension, George decided to aim lower, at her youth. "You've risen fast, maybe too fast. Are you really prepared for the weight of this platform you've built? Don't you think there's a risk of irresponsibility in moving so quickly?" That word, irresponsible, landed like an insult. Karoline's jaw tensed. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make every heartbeat in the studio audible. Then she spoke, low and deliberate. "Irresponsible. Do you know what's irresponsible, George? Pretending that live struggle is a liability. Have you ever had to claw your way into a room just to be taken seriously? I didn't skip lines. I didn't inherit a microphone. I earned every inch of ground I stand on. And if you think speed disqualifies me, maybe it's because you're too used to a system where people wait their turn until they're too compromised to matter. That landed like a sledgehammer. And for the first time, George's smirk faltered. The cameras kept rolling. The energy was shifting. This wasn't a neat Q&A. This was a duel. George adjusted in his chair, leaning forward with the kind of confidence that comes from decades in broadcast. But confidence can look a lot like arrogance when it's met with someone unwilling to bend. He licked his lips, eyes narrowing as though he'd found the angle that would finally crack her composure. "Look, Karoline, I'm not diminishing your personal story," he began, tone deceptively calm. "But when you have such a large following, especially of young people, don't you think you owe them more than slogans? Don't you owe them responsibility?" It was a clever move, or at least it would have been with anyone else. Frame her as reckless, make her sound like a careless populist shouting into the void. But Karoline didn't flinch. If anything, her voice grew steadier, sharper, like a blade being honed. "I don't owe them slogans, George," she said flatly. "I owe them truth. I owe them proof that someone who doesn't bow to the establishment can still fight for them without selling out. The people I speak to don't need my permission. They need someone to actually represent them instead of mocking them from TV studios in New York that hit like a slap." The crew in the control room glanced at one another nervously. This was going off script and fast, but George wasn't ready to cede ground. He jabbed harder. "Truth, Karoline, or confrontation? Because to many viewers, your message sounds less like leadership and more like outrage. With all respect, does yelling at the system really fix it? Or are you just another politician cashing in on chaos?" For a split second, the studio was silent. The audience at home couldn't see it, but even the camera operators braced themselves. That wasn't a question. That was a challenge designed to brand her as an opportunist. Karoline didn't blink. "Chaos?" she shot back, her voice edged with disdain. "The chaos isn't coming from me, George. It's coming from the same system you've spent years defending with a straight face. The chaos is veterans waiting months for basic health care. It's single moms working 2 jobs while inflation eats their paychecks. It's small towns gutted while elites toast themselves with champagne. If my anger at that sounds chaotic to you, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." The words detonated across the studio. The tension was no longer thick, it was choking. George's polished mask slipped. He raised his voice, his hands gripping his note cards like they were lifelines. "So let me get this straight. You criticize the system, yet here you are, benefiting from it. You're on national television, selling books, building a career. Isn't that hypocrisy? You call out the machine while feeding off of it. That was it, the spark that ignited the explosion." Karoline leaned forward so sharply her chair squealed against the floor. Her voice, when it came, was ice over fire. "You want to talk about profit? Fine. Let's talk about how networks like yours profit off fear and outrage every single day. You don't inform people, George. You manipulate them. You package division into digestible segments and call it journalism, all while pretending you're the referee. That's not reporting. That's performance." The audience at home could practically hear the air leave the room. George straightened his back, visibly rattled. "That's not what this is about," he barked, his voice suddenly defensive. But Karoline wasn't letting him off the hook. "No, it's exactly what this is about. You invited me here to talk about my book, and instead, you staged an ambush. You don't care about ideas, you care about a spectacle. And now that I'm pushing back, you don't know what to do with it." The control booth froze. Should they cut to commercial? Should they let it ride? Every instinct screamed to cut, but the raw electricity of the moment glued their fingers to the console. George tried to reclaim authority. "Karoline, When someone has a national platform, they should expect scrutiny. That's my job, to ask the hard questions. But his voice trembled slightly. The balance of power had already shifted. Karoline's laugh was cold, bitter. Hard questions? Don't insult me. Hard questions are about policy, about ideas. What you're doing isn't questioning, it's cornering. You came with your script written before I sat down. You didn't want a conversation, you wanted blood. And now that I refuse to play nice, you're scrambling. Her words cut like glass, and George's face flushed red. For the first time, he looked less like a seasoned journalist and more like a man cornered on his own stage. Then came the line that would ricochet across social media within minutes. Karoline's voice sharpened, carrying the weight of a generation's frustration. You call this journalism? No, George, this is theater. This is manipulation dressed up as objectivity, and I'm not here to play your part in it. The audience at home could feel the tremor in her words. This wasn't rehearsed spin. It was raw, visceral defiance. For a brief moment, even George seemed at a loss. He shuffled his papers, took a breath, and tried again, this time with more restraint. If your movement is really about unity, then why does your message come wrapped in so much confrontation? Karoline didn't hesitate. Her reply was lightning fast, devastating. Because confrontation is the only language the establishment understands. Quiet voices are ignored. Polite requests get buried. But raise your voice, refuse to be silenced, and suddenly you're branded as dangerous. That's how the system protects itself. But I won't play along, and I won't apologize for fighting back. By now, viewers at home weren't sipping their morning coffee anymore. They were leaning forward, riveted. They weren't watching an interview. They were watching a brawl that cut deeper than party politics. It was about power, about who gets to speak, and about who gets silenced. And Karoline wasn't done. The studio felt less like a TV set now, and more like a courtroom where the judge had lost control. George's polished exterior was unraveling, and Karoline wasn't letting him breathe. He tried to sit taller, tried to look composed, but his voice betrayed him. So now you're accusing the entire press of being corrupt? He demanded, his words landing more as a plea than an attack. Karoline didn't hesitate. Not the entire press, George. Just the ones who hide behind fake neutrality while running cover for power. And that's you. That's this show. That's networks like yours. Gasps rippled across the crew. Even the camera operators shifted uncomfortably. It was one thing for a guest to spar with questions. It was another to accuse the anchor himself of being part of the rot. George snapped back, louder than before. That's not fair. My job is to hold people like you accountable. Karoline leaned in so close the tension between them was practically tangible. No, your job used to be about informing the public. Now your job is stirring chaos for ratings. That's the accountability you care about, whether your clip trends online, not whether families can afford groceries. Every word hit like a hammer, and George's fingers tightened around his note cards until they crumpled. His trademark smirk had vanished, replaced with a scowl. Karoline, calm down, he muttered, voice low but sharp, as though trying to reassert control. That was the wrong move. Her eyes lit with fury. Calm down? That's what women are told when they refuse to shut up. When they stop smiling for the cameras and start speaking truth to power. No, George, I won't calm down. Not for you, not for your producers, not for anyone who thinks outrage is only acceptable when it serves their narrative. The control room was in meltdown. One producer mouthed to another, "Do we cut?" But no one dared. The electricity was too real, too uncontainable. George tried to stand on his last pillar, authority. This is live television, Karoline, not your campaign rally. You don't get to hijack the conversation. Karoline's laugh was sharp, almost mocking. Hijack? You invited me here under false pretenses. You wanted to talk about my book. Instead, you staged an ambush because controversy feeds your bottom line. But the difference is, George, I came here ready for your game. And guess what? I'm not playing by your rules. The back and forth had escalated into something primal. Both were leaning forward now, voices rising, the lines between host and guest obliterated. This wasn't dialogue. This was war. And then it happened. The moment that would replay on loop across every network, every platform, for weeks. George, perhaps forgetting his microphone was still hot, muttered under his breath, "This is what happens when you put a kid in a leader's chair." The words hit like a thunderclap. The studio froze. Karoline stopped mid-sentence, her expression hardening into steel. She slowly stood, heels clicking against the polished floor like a war drum. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice low, deadly calm. George's eyes widened. I didn't mean—" "No," she cut in, slicing through his stammer. "Say it again. Say it loud enough so every viewer at home can hear exactly how deep your bias runs." The silence was unbearable. Every second dragged like an eternity. "You think my age disqualifies me? That my ideas matter less because I haven't spent 30 years collecting titles and paychecks in DC? That's not journalism, George. That's elitism. That's entitlement dressed up as experience." Her words poured like fire, steady and relentless. "You think leadership is about tenure. I think leadership is about truth. And that's why people listen to me and tune you out." George swallowed hard, visibly shaken. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in his career, the anchor who always had a comeback was speechless. Karoline turned, this time not just to George, but to the millions watching at home. Her voice sharpened into a declaration. "You tell young people to wait their turn, to serve the system that's been failing them their entire lives. And when they don't, when they dare to break the mold, you brand them reckless. But you know what's reckless, George? Leaving America in the hands of people who confuse seniority with wisdom, who cling to their chairs while the country crumbles beneath them." The audience watching from their living rooms could feel the weight of it. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was a generational revolt live on air. George tried weakly to recover. "Karoline, passion is admirable, but it can cloud judgment." Her glare cut him off before he could finish. "You think passion is weakness? That caring deeply makes me unstable. That's the arrogance of the media class. You turn sincerity into a spectacle, reduce conviction to hysteria. But I'll tell you this, George. Americans are tired of being told to sit down, shut up, and let the experts run their lives into the ground. That's why your words don't land anymore. That's why your grip is slipping." The studio was trembling under the weight of her words, and George knew it. For the first time, his hands trembled as he reached for his coffee mug. He didn't drink, he just stared, knowing the narrative had slipped completely out of his control. If you like this video, then subscribe.